The story doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts in the car. Jill Carter, 28, sat in the driver's seat of her silver sedan, hands still on the steering wheel, even though the engine had gone quiet. She hadn't meant to see Reed Lawson again, her ex, the one who had once written her love songs on napkins but now struggled to book a single gig. But when he called that afternoon, sounding fragile, saying he just needed someone who still believed in him, she had agreed to meet. A mistake, perhaps, but not the kind of mistake she was about to be accused of. Reed sat beside her, fidgeting with a cigarette he never lit. The air smelled of rain on asphalt, heavy and metallic. Jill glanced at him, wondering whether she had just stepped back into a life she had fought hard to leave behind. And then, bang. The passenger side window shook with the force of a fist. Jill jerked. Outside the glass loomed Tamsin Rowe, 26, Reed's new girlfriend. Her blonde hair clung to her cheeks in strands of fury. Her knuckles struck again, rattling the window. Her voice, raw and jagged, cut through the stale air of the car. "Get out of my man's car, you washed-up secretary." The words cracked like a whip, sharper than the fist on glass. Reed froze. Jill felt the heat of humiliation crawl up her neck. Secretary? She worked in marketing. But to Tamsin, accuracy didn't matter, only the insult, the dominance. Jill reached for the window switch, meaning to roll it up, but she was too slow. Tamsin's hand darted through the small gap, claw-like. Fingers seized a lock of Jill's chestnut hair and yanked. The pain was white-hot. Jill screamed. Her scalp burned as if it were being torn from her skull. In that split second, another voice spoke. Soft, distant, from years ago. Her mother's voice. "Never lower your head, crown might fall." The memory collided with the present. Jill's eyes watered, but she fought to lift her chin, even as her hair was pulled like reins. She would not bow to this. Reed muttered something half-hearted, a plea without conviction. "Tamsin, stop!" But his words hung limp in the storm of violence. Tamsin released Jill's hair only to rear back and slam her boot into the car door. Metal dented with a hollow thunk. The whole frame shuddered. Adrenaline surged through Jill. Her fingers twisted the key, engine roaring to life. She slammed the gear into drive. The tires screeched against the wet road. For a heartbeat, escape seemed possible. But in the rearview mirror, headlights flared. Tamsin had already jumped into her own hatchback, teeth bared in a grin that looked too close to madness. She gunned the engine, chasing. The sedan lurched forward, Jill gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. Reed cursed beside her, finally awake to the danger. "She's going to." The impact cut him off. Bang! The sound of steel folding against steel filled the street. Jill's head snapped forward, seatbelt locking across her chest. Her purse flew off the passenger seat, scattering lipstick, receipts, and a cracked phone screen across the floor. Her heartbeat thundered, louder than the crumpling metal. For a moment, she thought the world had gone silent, but then came the hiss of the air vents, the rattle of the mirror, Reed's strangled shout, and, faint but insistent, beep. Across the street, mounted on a neighbor's porch, a small red light blinked. A security camera. Its lens, unblinking, had recorded everything. The hair yanking, the door kick, the vehicular assault. A silent witness. Beep, beep, beep. Like a metronome of fate. The foreshadowing ticked, unnoticed by Tamsin, who was already stepping out of her car, shouting triumphantly. "You asked for it, Jill. You provoked me!" Neighbors stirred behind curtains. Someone shouted for the police. Jill touched her head, fingers brushing strands of torn hair, and realized that this night had just been weaponized against her. And yet the crown still rested painfully, defiantly, on her head. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and stale air conditioning, the kind of smell that seemed to flatten every emotion into routine. The bailiff called the case. The gallery leaned forward, ready to feast. Tamsin Rowe adjusted her blazer, a borrowed jacket, slightly too big across her shoulders, and sauntered to the witness stand as if she were walking onto a stage she owned. Her chin lifted, her eyes glittered with righteous fire. To anyone who didn't know the footage, she looked less like a defendant and more like a woman wronged. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, then lowered it with a dramatic sigh, as though justice itself were already weary of her suffering. Her attorney gave a nod. "Ms. Rowe, please tell the court what happened on the night of May 14. And so the lie began. "Oh!" Jill Carter attacked me first. The words landed like a stone in water, heavy, sinking, rippling outward. Tamsin folded her arms, leaned toward the microphone. She smirked at me, mocked me. When I reached to ask what she thought she was doing in Reed's car, she shoved my hand away. Hard. I stumbled. I thought she was going to hit me, so I defended myself. The gallery murmured. Jill sat at the defense table, face composed, though her hands clenched beneath the surface. Tamsin's voice grew stronger, her narrative smoother with each sentence. "I've been with Reed for a year. Everyone at the bar knows me. I've never started drama in my life. She's obsessed with him, not me. She follows him, stalks him, plays victim when he tries to move on." She glanced sideways at Reed. "Huh!" He sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact, his jaw set in a line of cowardice. From the prosecution table, an assistant district attorney nodded almost imperceptibly, as though the story aligned with his preconceptions. A couple of Tamsin's friends from the bar, summoned as witnesses, leaned forward eagerly, already rehearsing their lines of loyalty. And so the system hummed its old tune, nodding, agreeing, complicit, motif repeated like a drumbeat. She attacked first. She attacked first. Each time Tamsin said it, the words lost substance, like a photocopy fading with each copy. But repetition has a power of its own. The jury's heads tilted. One or two spectators whispered. Narrative was bending reality. Amelia Grant, the youngest clerk in the room, frowned. Her pen scribbled in the margin of her legal pad. Why is everyone nodding? Did they even look at the evidence? She chewed her lip, eyes darting from Tamsin's animated gestures to Jill's still posture. But Amelia said nothing. Clerks didn't interrupt trials. Tamsin leaned closer to the microphone, lowering her tone for effect. Your Honor, I was defending love. The phrase hung in the air. A few heads in the gallery nodded, as if violence could be sanitized by romance. But the more she repeated it, I was defending love, I was defending love, the thinner it sounded, like a balloon stretched to breaking. Even the judge's eyebrows twitched at the melodrama, though he remained expressionless. Then came the supporting cast. A barmaid testified that Tamsin was always sweet, never confrontational. She giggled nervously, eyes darting toward Tamsin as if seeking approval. Another friend claimed Jill had shown up at the bar weeks earlier, glaring at Tamsin, muttering insults under her breath. None of it documented, none of it verifiable. But in the theater of testimony, absence of proof sometimes masqueraded as proof itself. The ADA asked leading questions, his voice oily with presumption. So Ms. Carter has a history of jealousy, would you say? Yes, the barmaid answered, eyes wide with certainty she didn't own. Piece by piece, the narrative was built. Jill as the aggressor, Jill as the scorned ex, Jill as the unstable woman who couldn't let go. Meanwhile, Jill sat silent, her attorney resting a calming hand on her arm. Her hair, still shorter on one side from where Tamsin had yanked it out, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She said nothing, but her silence was interpreted not as strength, but as guilt. Reed shifted uncomfortably. Once, his gaze flicked toward Jill, then away as if burned. He could have spoken. He could have said Tamsin had shown jealousy before, that she had a temper. But he didn't. Cowardice was easier than truth. The lie gained momentum, and yet tiny cracks. One witness, an older neighbor, took the stand. She swore she had seen the scuffle around 7 Euro p.m. Still daylight, she said firmly, but the incident had happened closer to 9:00, long after sunset. The discrepancy went unnoticed by most, brushed aside like dust in a corner. But Amelia wrote it down in bold. Contradiction, time wrong. The motif of deceit wove tighter, but seeds of doubt were sown. Tamsin, emboldened, leaned back in her chair after her testimony, folding her hands with a smug serenity. She had painted herself as victim, as guardian of love. Each, she attacked first, landed like nails hammered into Jill's coffin. The jury shifted, eyes softening toward Tamsin's theatrics. Jill looked more and more like a defendant on trial for her own existence, and in that moment, the injustice was palpable, heavy, suffocating, designed. Because that is how lies work in courtrooms. Not always sharp and obvious, but smooth, practiced, repeated until silence itself becomes complicity. Amelia's pen scratched again. Truth feels smaller in this room than performance. Jill inhaled, steady, waiting. Waiting! Because she knew something no one else yet did. She knew the camera across Maple Street had been blinking red. She knew silence was not surrender, it was strategy. For now, though, the lie reigned. The chapter closed with Tamsin's final flourish, her voice trembling with faux vulnerability. I swear, Your Honor, I only acted because I was defending love. And the gallery believed her. For now. The courtroom had been thick with Tamsin's narrative, sticky, cloying, convincing enough to sway the uncritical ear. But then the balance shifted. Jill Carter rose. She didn't scrape her chair noisily. She didn't slam her palms on the table or raise her voice. She simply stood, smoothed the crease in her blazer, and faced the judge with the composure of someone who had already fought 100 battles in silence. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Too calm, almost clinical. Your Honor, she began, under Penal Code Section 242, battery requires unlawful force. What happened here wasn't mutual. It was unilateral. And it was captured on camera. The words fell with the clean precision of scalpels, not the blunt thuds of accusation. The gallery stirred. This was not the shaky, defensive tone of a woman cornered by lies. This was articulation measured, deliberate. Jill continued, steady as a metronome. I am requesting a preservation order for the security footage recorded at 14 Maple Street. That property, owned by Mr. Maxing's 1602 was, and Mrs. Henderson maintains a camera facing directly toward the street. That footage contains the entire sequence of events. The judge leaned forward slightly. The ADA blinked, caught off guard. Tamsin, seated smugly moments earlier, bristled. There was no camera, she started, but Jill didn't even turn to look at her. Ms. Rowe claims she was defending love, Jill said, voice cool as glass. Tell me, Your Honor, since when does love involve bruises and car crashes? A ripple of unease crossed the courtroom. Someone in the gallery coughed nervously. Even the court reporter's keys faltered for a second. Tamsin flushed crimson. She's twisting. Objection, argumentative, the ADA cut in, but it was limp, half-hearted. Jill wasn't ranting. She was dissecting. Jill's eyes moved to the jury, then back to the bench. I won't waste this court's time with theatrics. I'll give you the facts. She reached through my window and pulled my hair hard enough to tear it out at the root. She dented my door with her boot. She pursued me in her vehicle and rammed my bumper. These are not metaphors. These are physical acts, and they are all preserved on digital record. The judge's gavel tapped once, not in reprimand, but in acknowledgement of order. Tamsin fumed, interrupting again. She shoved me first. She laughed in my face. But the more Jill spoke, the less oxygen remained for Tamsin's theatrics. Jill's words sliced through the noise. The statute does not care about jealousy, about gossip, or about who dated whom. It cares about unlawful force applied to another human being. That is the legal threshold. That threshold was crossed by her, not me. The calmness was uncanny. People began to glance at each other. This didn't sound like a frightened ex-girlfriend fumbling to defend herself. It sounded like something else. Even Amelia Grant, the young clerk, paused in her notes. Jill's cadence, her references, the crispness of her legal phrasing. This was the rhythm of a trained litigator. Jill paused, then added, quieter. Your Honor, I once had a colleague, an intern, who was assaulted outside her office. She had no footage, no preservation order. By the time she filed, the recordings were erased. She lost her case. She lost her faith in the system. That was 3 years ago. I won't let this court repeat that failure tonight. Her eyes flicked upward, not to the gallery, but to the red recording light of the overhead camera mounted by the court itself. The symbolism was not lost. Tamsin slammed her palm against the table. She's making this sound like some legal class. She's no lawyer. A murmur spread, because the truth was, Jill sounded exactly like one. The judge cleared his throat, silencing the room. Ms. Carter, please continue. Jill inclined her head slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. She turned her gaze briefly to Tamsin, then back to the bench. This case is not about who loved whom. It is not about jealousy, rumors, or reputation spun at bars. It is about unlawful force, about physical evidence, and about truth, which has already been recorded and awaits this court's order to be preserved. Her hands never trembled. Her voice never cracked. The steadiness was unnerving, even to those inclined against her. For the first time, Tamsin's mask slipped. Her jaw tightened, her eyes darted, her foot tapped uncontrollably. And Jill's closing line landed with surgical precision. And I would remind the court, she let the pause linger, just long enough for suspense, I am not unfamiliar with this process. The gallery inhaled collectively. The judge's pen froze mid-note. The ADA frowned. Even Reed, who had avoided her eyes all afternoon, looked at Jill as though he were seeing someone unrecognizable. Because in those few minutes, Jill had transformed the narrative. She was no longer a cornered woman swatting away accusations. She was something else, calm, practiced, and disturbingly prepared. And for the first time since the trial began, the lie began to wobble. The air in the courtroom was taut as wire. Jill's calm dismantling of Tamsin's narrative had shifted something invisible, but fragile. The ADA leaned forward, irritation sharpening his tone. He sneered, Your Honor, with all respect, we can't indulge amateur theatrics. Ms. Carter isn't a lawyer. She's a secretary playing dress-up with statutes, she Googled. The words were meant to cut. They echoed off the paneled walls, heavy with mockery. The gallery chuckled softly, snickers rippling like cruel applause. Jill did not flinch. She inhaled once, slow, steady, as though she had been waiting for this insult. Her hand slipped into her bag. The hush that followed was so complete that the sound of a pen rolling off a desk somewhere in the gallery was audible. She didn't raise the card immediately. Not yet. She began with words, clipped and formal. Carter, J-bar number 54182. The syllables cracked the silence like a gavel. For a heartbeat, nobody reacted. The meaning took time to seep in. Then, Clerk Amelia's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor, echoing louder than it should have. Reed's mouth fell open, his breath catching audibly. The ADA's smirk faltered, dissolving into confusion. Even the judge blinked, momentarily stunned. Excuse me? Jill withdrew the small, worn leather case, opened it, and laid the card flat on the podium for all to see. The Massachusetts Bar Association license, embossed with her name. She did not flourish it, did not wave it around. She simply let the truth sit, undeniable. I am not unfamiliar with this process, Jill said evenly, repeating her earlier words, but now with their true weight revealed. Gasps stirred the gallery. Phones tilted upward, as though tempted to capture history but restrained by the stirring glare of the bailiff. Slow motion, as if the room itself had slowed. Jill reached into her tote and pulled out a black blazer. She slipped one arm through the sleeve, then the other. The soft rasp of fabric, swoosh, swuss, was the only sound in the room. Under the fluorescent lights, the Bar Association emblem pin on her lapel glinted, a shard of authority cutting through the haze of disbelief. Her inner voice surfaced, quieter than her speech, but clear. I stayed silent long enough. Tonight, I speak in my own name. The judge leaned back, eyes wide, but guarded. Miss Carter, you are a licensed attorney? Jill's gaze did not waver. Yes, Your Honor. Licensed, active, and sworn. Tamsin jolted upright. She can't do that. She lied. She is counsel, the judge interrupted, voice thunderous, silencing the outburst. And you will not interrupt her again. The pivot was complete. The accuser had become the accused, and the woman mocked as secretary now stood cloaked in authority. Reed's voice, trembling, broke the stunned quiet. Jill, you're a lawyer? She turned her head slowly, met his bewildered eyes. I was, she said, the past tense carrying a ghost of resignation. Then, stronger I am. And today, I act. Every word was deliberate, every pause measured like a scalpel cutting into the myth Tamsin had spun. The ADA shuffled his papers, rattled. Why conceal your status, Ms. Burrs? Carter. Because, Jill answered, I wanted the truth to stand on its own legs before my title propped it up. Now you see, it was never theatrics. It was law. She let that hang in the air. Amelia bent quickly, retrieving her fallen pen, but her hands shook. Her notes now sprawled with exclamation marks. She whispered to herself, almost reverently, She's one of us. Jill straightened the lapels of her blazer, eyes sweeping the gallery. The posture, the cadence, the certainty. This was no longer a victim clinging to credibility. This was an officer of the court reclaiming ground stolen by lies. Her inner thought sharpened. They laughed at the word secretary. They tried to erase my standing. But law is not erased by laughter. The judge cleared his throat again, more respectfully now. Proceed, Counselor Carter. The title, counselor, shifted the tectonic plates of the trial. Where there had been snickers, there was now silence. Where there had been smug nods, there was dawning fear. Tamsin sank back into her chair, her bravado slipping like paint in the rain. Jill fixed her with a look, not gloating, not cruel, but unwavering. Ms. Rowe, you thought you could distort this forum into theater, but you've mistaken the stage. This is a court of law, and the law does not bow to gossip. The gallery buzzed, unable to hold back this time. The bailiff called for order. Jill lowered her voice, almost intimate, but the microphone carried it across the chamber. I will present the footage. I will present the evidence. And when I do, there will be no room left for fairy tales about love defended by violence. Her blazer sleeve caught the light again as she folded her arms, not in defiance, but in poise. The crown didn't fall, she thought. It never fell. The moment crystallized, her identity revealed, her authority cemented, her voice no longer confined to the margins. The lie had ruled for hours. But in one sentence, one bar number, one blazer, Jill Carter had turned the courtroom upside down. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the bailiff wheeled in the projector cart. A white screen descended with a mechanical hum, like the overture of Revelation. Jill Carter stood at the podium, black blazer gleaming, clicker in hand. No longer the defendant, she was now conductor, orchestrating the truth. She looked at the judge. With the court's permission, I'd like to introduce Exhibit A. The judge nodded, measured but curious. Proceed, Counselor Carter. The title, Counselor, still reverberated. Jill pressed the clicker. A frozen frame appeared on the screen. The quiet suburban street of Maple, night settling in, grainy yet damning. She spoke calmly, almost like a professor in lecture. This is the CCTV footage from 14 Maple Street, preserved per the court's order. Timestamp 9:03 p.m., May 14. Click. The video rolled. The gallery leaned forward. They saw Jill's silver sedan parked by the curb. They saw Tamsin stride into frame, fists pounding against the window. They heard muffled shouts through the microphone synced with the camera. And then, they saw it. Tamsin's hand darting in, seizing Jill's hair, yanking hard. Jill's head snapped sideways, her mouth opening in a silent scream until the audio caught up. Stop pulling my hair! The voice cracked, raw with pain. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. One juror flinched visibly. Jill clicked again. The video froze. Tamsin's hand twisted in Jill's hair, strands visibly taut. Jill zoomed in on the still frame, the screen pixelating but unmistakable. This, she said, her tone surgical, is not love. This is battery. Force applied without consent. Clear, deliberate, unlawful. Tamsin's face drained of color. Her fingers twitched nervously on the table. Jill let the silence marinate, then pressed the clicker again. The footage resumed, Tamsin rearing back and slamming her boot into the car door. The hollow metallic thunk reverberated from the audio feed, harsh and undeniable. The camera caught the dent caving in, the sedan shuddering. Click, freeze frame. Jill zoomed into the cratered door. Exhibit B, property damage. Unprovoked, documented in real time. She glanced at the judge, then at the gallery. Her voice lowered, scalpel sharp. This is not the posture of a woman defending herself. This is an aggressor escalating violence. Reed put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, not from tears, but from shame, too heavy to carry upright. Tamsin muttered under her breath, "It's out of context." But Jill had already clicked again. The footage rolled, Jill's sedan pulling away, Tamsin sprinting to her hatchback, engine roaring, headlights flaring like predator's eyes. Then, the inevitable AR. The violent slam of bumper to bumper. The audio caught the crunch of steel, the shriek of metal against metal. The gallery erupted with gasps, whispers, a low hum of horror. Click, freeze, zoom. The silver sedan's bumper bent inward, shards of plastic scattering across the asphalt. Jill's tone didn't waver. Exhibit C, reckless endangerment. Pursuit by vehicle, collision deliberate, captured frame by frame. Tamsin's hands shook openly now. She grabbed her water glass, fingers trembling so badly the ice clinked against the rim. The ADA avoided Jill's gaze, staring down at his notes as if words could shield him from images burned into every eye in the room. "Amelia," the clerk whispered audibly to herself, unable to stop. Finally, the truth breathes. Jill wasn't finished. She stepped to the side, a new slide appearing on the screen. A photograph of her sedan's dented door, time-stamped the morning after, paired with the repair shop invoice, 2003-74-16. Exhibit D, corroborating documentation. The dent seen in the footage? Here, photographed. The repairs, invoiced. Click. The slide changed. A medical report. Photographs of Jill's scalp, bald patches where hair had been torn free. Gasps again. Someone in the back muttered, "Jesus Christ." "Exhibit E, medical evidence," Jill said, voice steady though her jaw tightened slightly. "This is the injury inflicted when Ms. Rowe pulled my hair." The judge's lips pressed thin. The gallery, once tilting toward sympathy for Tamsin, now leaned the other way, their weight shifting with every piece of proof. Jill allowed a pause, then clicked again. A spreadsheet appeared, sterile, factual, devastating. "In the past 3 years," Jill narrated, "there have been 127 complaints filed regarding violent altercations at the establishment where Mrs. Bashdaby Rowe works. Only 4 were prosecuted, the rest dismissed." She looked directly at the ADA. 3 of those complaints named Mrs. Rowe specifically, all ignored. She let the words hang, short, sharp, like hammer blows. 127? 4 prosecuted. Her voice cut like a gavel, slamming with each number. The judge frowned deeply, scribbling notes. Jurors exchanged glances. The ADA sank further into his chair, cheeks coloring with embarrassment. Tamsin shook her head violently. "That's not fair. Those reports were lies, people jealous of me." But Jill clicked again. Another document flashed up. An internal incident report, bar security footage still showing Tamsin shoving another woman by the jukebox. Dated, signed, filed, buried. Exhibit F, pattern of behavior, Jill said coldly. Dismissed at the time, conveniently. But the pattern speaks louder than denials. The gallery buzzed like a hive. Someone whispered, "She's done." Tamsin's breathing grew shallow. Her bravado was disintegrating. Her fingers gripped the table edge as though holding on against a tide. Jill turned back to the judge, her voice rising, not in volume, but in conviction. "This is not an isolated outburst. This is not one night of passion. This is a continuum of violence overlooked, excused, dismissed. Tonight, this court has the chance to end that continuum." Click. The final slide appeared. A collage montage of stills. Tamsin's hand yanking hair. Jill's scream. The dent in the door. The cars colliding. The medical photos. The repair invoice. The bar report. One by one, Jill clicked, each image enlarging then fading, like the rhythmic pound of truth hammering nails into the coffin of lies. Hair, dent, crash, injury, invoice, report. The gallery sat stunned, silence deeper than any gavel's demand. Jill lowered the clicker, her final words deliberate. "Actions have consequences. Tonight, the consequence is evidence." The judge exhaled audibly. His eyes swept the room, resting on Tamsin trembling at the defendant's table. The ADA shifted, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Reed kept his face buried in his hands. And Clerk Amelia, heart pounding, scribbled one line in her notes, underlined twice. Truth, finally louder than performance. The montage ended. The lie lay shattered. And for the first time, justice felt tangible in the air, electric as stormlight. The last slide of evidence lingered on the screen. the frozen frame of Tamsin's boot colliding with Jill's car door. The silence in the courtroom was thick enough to choke. Jill let it breathe for a beat, then lowered the clicker, her eyes sweeping across the gallery. And then her voice shifted. No longer dissecting facts, no longer speaking just for herself. She spoke larger. "This isn't just one outburst," Jill said, her tone firm, measured. "This is a pattern. Women reporting violence dismissed as drama queens, assault reframed as lovers' quarrels, complaints buried under ridicule instead of reviewed under law." A murmur ran through the gallery. People knew it. People had seen it. But rarely was it said so plainly, under oath, in court. Jill turned back to the projector. The next slide appeared stark text against black, like a headline etched in stone. 68% of bar-related domestic violence cases never prosecuted. 43% of victims countersued by perpetrators. The gallery gasped. The numbers were simple, brutal, undeniable. 68%, Jill repeated, pacing slowly before the screen. That means 2 out of 3 women who come forward are told, "We can't help you." And 43% are punished for speaking, for daring to accuse. She let her gaze rest on the jury. This is not a fluke. This is not a clerical error. This is how the system is designed to silence. Her hand rose, gesturing toward the board brought in earlier. In bold black marker, she had drawn a crude diagram, 3 words linked by arrows. DRAMA, dismissal violence. "Excuse, pattern system." She tapped the board with her pen. Thud. The sound carried like a drumbeat. "This," Jill declared, "is the real cycle on trial today. Not just what Ms. Rowe did in the street, but what we as a system do every time we excuse it." The ADA shifted uncomfortably, sweat purling at his temple. The judge's face remained impassive, but his pen stopped moving. Jill continued. "When I was 25, I mentored a law student, bright as fire, named Rena Alvarez. She was attacked outside her apartment, punched so hard she broke her nose. She filed a report. But by the time she demanded evidence, the footage had been erased. Lost, they said. Her case was dropped. She dropped out of law school a semester later. She told me, if the law doesn't protect me, why would I ever protect it?" The gallery was silent now, leaning forward, the personal woven into the systemic. Jill clicked again. A new slide. A mother's face, blurred for privacy, next to a police docket stamped at closed west. "Exhibit G," Jill said quietly. A mother who lost her son to a drunk driver after a bar fight? Witnesses said the driver was enraged, violent, but the file was closed for lack of witness cooperation. That mother sits at home with an empty chair every night. She was told her grief was not evidence enough. Someone in the gallery sniffled loudly, unable to contain tears. Jill looked down just for a moment, then raised her eyes again. This is not a flaw. This is a design. The phrase cracked through the air, repeated by murmurs in the gallery. Even Amelia, scribbling furiously, underlined it 3 times. Not a flaw. A design. Pock. Jill stepped closer to the bench. She laid down a folder with crisp precision. Its cover bore the seal of the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. "This," Jill said, tapping the folder gently, "is where this case will go if this court fails. This won't end in this room. It goes federal. Because patterns this entrenched demand oversight." Her knuckles rapped once against the DOJ logo, a sound sharp as flint. The image of her hand on that seal seared itself into every mind present. She turned back to the jury, voice rising with passion now, though still controlled. "You've seen the footage. You've seen the numbers. You've heard the stories. And now you know. This is bigger than Jill Carter and Tamsin Rowe. This is about every woman whose bruises were called melodrama, whose police reports were laughed out of filing cabinets. This is about every voice that trembled in the telling and was punished for daring to tremble." She let her words settle, then added, "Quieter. Roar. Roar. I carry those voices with me today. Rena's broken nose, a mother's broken heart, and mine, the hair torn from my scalp. All dismissed in the same pattern. All excused as drama. Enough." The gallery erupted into hushed affirmations, people whispering "enough" under their breath, as if echoing a chant. The judge's gavel cracked once. Order. But even he could not suppress the atmosphere. Truth had changed the air. Jill returned to the board, tapped each word one by one. Drama dismissal. Violence. Excuse. Pattern system. Her hand dropped. Her voice hardened. "Today I demand you break this system." The final slide appeared behind her. Stark white letters on black. Justice. Isn't optional. ITs is obligatory. She let it hang there, filling the silence, filling the room. And in that silence, Clerk Amelia whispered again, not for her notes, but for herself. Finally, someone said it. The air in the courtroom seemed electrified, heavy with everything that had been said and shown. The screen behind Jill still glowed faintly with the final slide. Justice isn't optional. It's obligatory. The judge adjusted his glasses, face carved in granite. He reached for the gavel, fingers trembling just slightly, not from uncertainty but from the weight of what was about to be spoken. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. The gallery stood, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the bench. The judge's voice rang out, deep and deliberate. "In the case of Commonwealth versus Tamsin Rowe, the court finds the defendant guilty on 2 counts, battery and reckless endangerment. Sentencing includes 6 months suspended jail time, mandatory anger management, and restitution damages totaling $15,000 payable to Ms. Jill Carter." The gavel came down with a resonant crack. Gasps, murmurs, a rising tide of release rippled through the room. Tamsin sagged in her chair, face ashen. Her bravado had dissolved into hollow silence. Reed covered his face with both hands, as if hiding from the fallout of a storm he had helped summon but could not control. But Jill did not sit down. She stood tall, blazer squared, eyes fixed not on the judge but on the gallery, on the people who had come to witness, and perhaps, in some way, to measure what justice meant. "Your Honor," she said softly. "With respect, I have words left to say." The judge frowned, surprised. "Ms. Carter, the verdict has been delivered." "I know," Jill replied, "and yet silence has been the disease of this courtroom long enough. Today I will not leave in silence." The room stilled. Even the judge, after a moment's pause, gestured for her to continue. Jill turned, facing the jury, the spectators, the clerk still scribbling furiously, the attorneys frozen in their chairs. Her voice, when it came, was not cold or clinical. It was raw. "I stayed silent when a colleague was assaulted outside her office. I stayed silent when a friend was gaslit into believing bruises were her fault. I stayed silent when my own dignity was mocked, when I was called names to erase my standing. Today," her voice rose, sharp as steel, "I will not be silent." The words struck like thunder, echoing off oak-paneled walls. She drew a breath, then delivered the cadence of anaphora, each phrase heavier than the last. "Silence feeds lies. Silence feeds violence. Silence feeds injustice." The gallery whispered the words back under their breath, like a chorus repeating scripture. But Jill wasn't finished. She pressed forward, voice trembling now, not with fear but with passion. "I regret my silence. I regret my fear. I regret my patience. But I do not regret this fight." The rhythm built, a drumbeat in her own chest mirrored by the pounding hearts in the gallery. Amelia's pen paused mid-line. The clerk simply stared, eyes shining. Jill stepped closer to the microphone. Her final words cut through the air, slow and deliberate, meant to be carved into memory. "Justice is not the gavel's echo. It is the heart that no longer trembles." For a moment, no one breathed. Then the gallery erupted, not in applause, not in noise, but in a collective silence deeper than any before. The kind of silence that follows revelation, the kind of silence that acknowledges something sacred has just been said. The judge himself bowed his head slightly, not in deference but in respect. The gavel he had struck minutes earlier felt suddenly smaller than the words Jill had just delivered. Tamsin stared down at her trembling hands, no performance left in her body. Reed slumped lower, eyes wet, though whether from guilt or grief, no one could tell. Amelia, breaking protocol, whispered aloud, "Justice isn't loud. It's steady." The phrase spread like a spark across the benches, repeated in murmurs, shared like a prayer. Jill exhaled, the fight draining from her body, leaving something steadier, quieter, but unbroken. For the first time in months, her shoulders loosened. She had not just defended herself. She had spoken for every silence she once carried. The judge rose. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck once more, but this time, its echo felt less like finality, more like punctuation at the end of Jill's sentence. The verdict did not end the story. Courtrooms rarely do. What follows, the ripples, the shadows, the reverberations often mattered just as much. For Tamsin Rowe, the ripples were tidal. Within a week, she was fired from the bar where she had worked for 5 years. Management cited reputation risk, though the truth was simpler. No patron wanted to order drinks from a woman convicted of battery. Her license flagged with disciplinary records. Her name was whispered in legal databases, red ink staining her resume forever. The nightlife she once ruled as queen was gone. She applied to other establishments. Each time the answer came back the same. "We've reviewed your history. We cannot hire you. Ashcourt." Her friends scattered, unwilling to defend her now that lies had been unmasked on screen. Alone, Tamsin faded into a silence she once mocked in others. Reed Lawson, the failed musician caught between 2 women, packed his guitar into its battered case and left town. He told no one where he was going. Some said Nashville. Others said nowhere at all. His name stopped appearing on local open mic posters. He had become a ghost of his own indecision. For Jill Carter, however, silence was no longer the headline. Her dignity, once clawed away by insults, was restored. Not just restored, magnified. She became known as the attorney survivor, a phrase that spread across legal blogs and advocacy forums. Clips of her courtroom words circulated online. Viewers replayed the moment she revealed her bar number, the freeze frame of Tamsin's hand yanking her hair, the anaphora she spoke into eternity. Silence feeds lies. Silence feeds violence. Silence feeds injustice. Law students cited her case. Activists invited her to speak. Survivors sent her letters, thick with gratitude, heavy with stories. Jill read each one, humbled but burdened, because for every voice that wrote, she knew there were 10 more that still could not. Systemically, the city could not ignore the fallout. The mayor's office introduced a new ordinance within 2 months. All bars and nightclubs were required to install exterior cameras monitored by third parties. A symbolic gesture, perhaps, but also a tangible one. Never again, the ordinance declared, should the absence of footage mean the absence of justice. In one particularly poignant echo, a 19-year-old student assaulted outside a bar presented Jill's case in her own trial. The CCTV clip of Jill's car being rammed played side by side with her own bruises, her own torn jacket. The jury deliberated less than an hour before convicting her assailant. She walked free into a future she thought she had lost because Jill had made evidence impossible to ignore. And then there was Amelia Grant. Weeks after the trial, Jill received a handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. You showed me why law matters, why silence kills more than fists. I've applied to law school. Whatever happens, I will fight. Thank you. Signed simply, Amelia. Months later, another envelope came, this time from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard Law. Amelia's acceptance letter. In her dorm, unpacking boxes, she whispered into the still air. She lit the match. But Jill's aftershocks did not stop there. One evening, exactly a month after the verdict, Jill returned home to find a plain manila envelope slipped under her door. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop cautiously. It contained one file, the same CCTV footage, the hair yank, the kick, the crash. But now it ended with an added frame, text over black. Because of you, I spoke. Her breath caught. She didn't know who had sent it. Another victim? A witness? A stranger emboldened by her courage? It didn't matter. What mattered was that silence was cracking. Voices were spilling out. She closed the laptop, tears stinging her eyes but refusing to fall. Instead, she whispered, "Good, speak." The courthouse itself bore a new scar, but one of honor. A month after the case, a bronze plaque was affixed near the entrance doors, beneath the carved words, Justice Court. The plaque read, Hall of Fair Witnesses, dedicated to those who fought to make evidence speak when silence tried to bury it. Jill walked past it one autumn morning. The plaque glinted in the rising sun, golden against stone. She slowed, her fingers brushing lightly across the etched letters. But she didn't stop. Because Jill Carter was no longer defined by one case, one courtroom, one plaque. There was more work ahead, more voices waiting to be heard, more designs of silence waiting to be broken. She walked on, blazer fluttering in the cool wind, her silhouette steady, her crown invisible but unshaken. The aftermath wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The courthouse doors groaned open, and Jill Carter stepped into the night. Instantly, a wall of flashbulbs detonated. White light swallowed her silhouette, camera shutters rattling like machine gun fire. Reporters leaned over barricades, microphones thrust forward, each voice competing to be heard. Ms. Carter, how do you feel after the verdict? Was justice served? Do you regret representing yourself? Jill raised a hand, not to shield her face but to command silence. Slowly, astonishingly, the crowd obeyed. The flashbulbs still pulsed, but voices hushed, as though the night itself leaned in. She began softly, but every syllable carried. Silence only feeds injustice. Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story so no woman ever pays twice, once in pain, once in disbelief. The crowd stirred. Reporters scribbled furiously. The words were already being clipped, tweeted, transmitted. Then Jill did something no one expected. She didn't just speak. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, piercing through it as if addressing every unseen viewer beyond. If you're watching this, she said, voice firm, eyes unblinking, maybe you've been mocked as jealous. Maybe you've been ignored as dramatic. Maybe you've been told your bruises were theater, your fear an overreaction. Hear me, truth is louder. Share it. Flash, flash. The camera bulbs ignited her face, but she didn't flinch. She wanted the world to see her clearly, unblurred, unashamed. And then, the gesture that sealed the moment. From the inner pocket of her blazer, Jill pulled out her bar card. She held it high, steady, as dozens of lenses caught its reflection, the embossed seal flashing gold against the night. This, she said, raising the card so no one could mistake it, isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman silenced by doubt, by dismissal, by design. Share this, not for me, but for the next woman still cleaning blood off her steering wheel, still being told she's dramatic. Share it so she won't be alone in court. A gasp rolled through the reporters, not from shock, but from awe. For a moment, even they forgot to ask, forgot to shout, forgot to intrude. They were witnesses, just like the jury had been. Jill lowered the card, but her gaze stayed locked on the camera, breaking the fourth wall in a way no press conference had dared before. "I fought because I could," she said. "But justice is not steady until it is shared. If you hear my words, pass them forward, because silence has starved too many. Tonight, let truth feed instead." The crowd erupted again, shouts overlapping, but Jill had already delivered her headline. The sound no longer mattered. The words had been spoken into history, and then came the firebrand chisel, the closing line that would become caption, meme, mantra. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and declared, "Actions have consequences." Tonight, truth wasn't just heard, it was televised. Flash, 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 flash. The cameras froze her in light, immortalized in pixels. Behind her, the courthouse glowed, the new bronze plaque gleaming faintly, Hall of Fair Witness. In that moment, Jill Carter was no longer just a name in a docket. She was a witness for every silenced voice, and she had made sure the world could not look away.